I used to think babysitting was simply about preventing kids from hurting themselves or managing the occasional bedtime tantrum. I worked in childcare for nearly 4 years and considered myself highly capable. However, a single night at the Miller residence completely shattered my sense of security. And I am sharing this because people need to understand how easily a child's innocence can be weaponized against them. The Millers lived in an affluent, quiet suburb. Their property was expansive, with a backyard that faded directly into a dense, unlit tree line. I was hired to watch their 6-year-old son, Noah, for the evening. Noah was a remarkably practical and quiet child. He was never prone to wild imagination, imaginary friends, or typical childhood anxieties about the dark. That grounded nature is precisely what made the events of that evening so profoundly disturbing. After dinner, Noah was sitting on the living room rug working on a drawing. When I walked over to check on him, I noticed he had sketched a remarkably tall, entirely black figure with no facial features, standing hand in hand with a small boy. When I casually asked him about the picture, Noah explained that it was his secret friend who lived in the woods. He stated, matter-of-factly, that this friend frequently visited his playroom window to talk to him, and, more alarmingly, that the man was coming inside the house that very night to play hide-and-seek. Initially, I tried to rationalize it as a bizarre phase. I gently told him that nobody was coming over so late. But Noah's response immediately dissolved any logical comfort I had. He explained that his friend had explicitly warned him that adults wouldn't believe him. The man had instructed the child to keep their friendship a secret and had spent the last few days promising to bring new toys as long as Noah opened the back door and brought him some cookies. This was not the scattered, random logic of a toddler.
This was textbook psychological grooming. An adult was actively manipulating a vulnerable child, creating a secret bond to divide his trust. A deep, freezing panic set in. I told Noah to stay exactly where he was on the rug while I went to check the perimeter of the house. When I reached the kitchen and checked the sliding glass patio door, my stomach dropped. The primary latch had already been flipped open from the inside. The only reason the door remained shut was because the homeowners used a heavy metal security bar in the floor track, a safeguard that Noah simply lacked the physical strength to lift. I immediately secured the latch, closed the heavy curtains, and hurried back to the living room. The rug was empty. I frantically searched the first floor, eventually noticing the door to the dark laundry room was wide open. This room featured a side door leading directly out to the edge of the woods, secured only by a simple deadbolt. I found Noah standing there in the dark. He was on his tiptoes, holding a small plate of snacks in one hand, while his other hand was reaching up, fingers just grazing the lock. I rushed forward and grabbed him by the waist to pull him back. As I did, my eyes locked onto the frosted glass of the side door. There was a massive silhouette standing on the other side, pressed so tightly against the frame that the condensation from their breath was fogging the bottom pane of the glass. The intruder had realized the main sliding door was blocked and had silently redirected the child to the much easier side entrance, waiting patiently for the lock to turn. Realizing I had intervened, the figure struck the glass violently in frustration before turning and sprinting away into the darkness of the woods. I immediately carried Noah into a windowless bathroom, locked the heavy door, and contacted the police. The authorities arrived within minutes. Their sweep of the property revealed a deeply unsettling scene, directly beneath the child's playroom window. The mud was heavily trampled with large boot prints littered with dozens of cigarette butts and discarded candy wrappers. This person had not simply stumbled upon the house. He had spent weeks patiently lurking in the tree line, studying the family's routines, and talking to the child through the glass whenever he was left alone to play. He had methodically brainwashed a little boy with sweet promises, convincing him to willingly dismantle the home's security from the inside out.
The most terrifying truth I had to process that night wasn't just that an intruder tried to break in, but that his victim was happily prepared to welcome him inside.
Working in private childcare during my early 20s taught me that parents often possess a dangerous blind spot regarding their children's anxieties. They are quick to dismiss legitimate environmental observations as mere childhood imagination, a psychological coping mechanism that allows them to maintain the illusion of a perfectly secure home. This oversight nearly cost a family their lives during a weekend job I accepted in a sparsely populated, affluent rural community. The clients were an older couple who had recently adopted 2 young brothers, ages 5 and 10. Their property was situated at the end of a long, unpaved private road, bordered by acres of dense, unlit pine forest. Before departing for a 2-day retreat, the parents provided me with a highly detailed schedule and a written list of household quirks. At the very bottom of the page, almost as an afterthought, they noted that the youngest boy frequently complained about someone touching his bedroom window at night. The parents explicitly instructed me to ignore this, attributing the issue to seasonal winds blowing heavy tree branches against the siding, or perhaps raccoons foraging near the foundation. The first evening progressed without incident. I guided the boys through their bedtime routine, ensuring all ground floor windows were physically locked before turning off the hallway lights. I settled into the living room to study, keeping the house entirely dark save for a small, shielded reading lamp. Shortly after midnight, my concentration was broken by a faint, rhythmic friction vibrating through the drywall. It was emanating directly from the youngest boy's bedroom. Recalling the parents' note, my initial reaction was to dismiss it as wildlife. However, having grown up in a heavily wooded area myself, I understood the chaotic, unpredictable nature of animal activity. This vibration was different. It possessed a measured, deliberate consistency that felt undeniably human. I set my book aside and walked silently down the hallway. I did not turn on any overhead lights, knowing that illuminating the interior would turn the windows into 2-way mirrors, making me completely visible to the outside, while blinding me to the darkness. I entered the child's room, staying low to the floor, and verified that he was deeply asleep. The window in his room was a large, modern pane situated low to the ground, covered by heavy blackout curtains. Instead of approaching the glass directly, I positioned myself flat against the adjacent wall. I carefully used my index finger to peel back a fraction of an inch of the curtain fabric, creating a narrow sight line to the exterior. There was a man standing less than 2 feet from the glass. He was not a random drifter or a chaotic prowler. He was dressed entirely in matte, dark clothing, wearing a low-profile tactical vest and dark gloves. He held a small, heavy metallic block in his right hand. I watched in absolute horror as he slowly and systematically ran the block along the outer edge of the window casing. He would slide it a few inches, pause, check a small digital meter strapped to his wrist, and then continue. A sickening realization washed over me. He was not trying to break the glass. He was using a high-powered industrial magnet to sweep the window frame, attempting to locate and spoof the magnetic reed switches of the home's perimeter alarm system. He was calculating exactly how to bypass the sensors so the window could be pried open without sending a signal to the security company. The child's earlier complaints about the window were not the product of nightmares. The boy had been unknowingly witnessing a professional burglar mapping the home's physical vulnerabilities night after night. I knew that creating any sudden commotion, dropping the curtain or shining a flashlight, would immediately alert him to my presence, potentially escalating a quiet surveillance operation into an immediate, violent home invasion. I had to remain entirely undetected. I released the curtain and dropped to my hands and knees, slowly crawling toward the bed. I carefully gathered the sleeping 5-year-old into my arms, ensuring his blanket remained wrapped tightly around his limbs to prevent any sudden movements. I carried him out of the room, silently woke his older brother with a firm hand over his mouth to prevent him from asking questions, and guided them both into the master suite bathroom. It was a reinforced room located at the absolute center of the house, featuring no exterior walls or windows. Once the heavy, solid core door was locked, I used my cell phone to contact the local dispatcher. I bypassed the standard panic response and clearly articulated that I was observing an active, organized casing of a residential property, providing detailed descriptions of the intruder's equipment and methods. Recognizing the professional nature of the threat, the dispatcher instructed the responding officers to kill their sirens and approach the property on foot from the main highway. They apprehended the individual 15 minutes later as he was attempting to dismantle the exterior telecom junction box on the blind side of the house. The subsequent investigation revealed a terrifying level of premeditation. The man's vehicle, parked discreetly on a neighboring logging road, did not contain typical burglary tools. Instead, police recovered a cache of heavy-duty zip ties, duct tape, sedatives, and a highly detailed, hand-drawn schematic of the family's interior floor plan, complete with notations on the children's sleep schedules. The authorities later confirmed that he had selected the property specifically because of its isolation and the predictable routines of the homeowners. He had used the previous nights to test the structural defenses, planning to execute a coordinated invasion once he was confident the alarm system could be bypassed. Had I trusted the parents' dismissive written note and ignored the methodical testing of that window, I would have unknowingly allowed a highly prepared predator to finalize his entry strategy while we slept. The most dangerous predators rarely look the part. They do not violently break down doors or hide in the shadows of a closet. Instead, they are invited inside, cloaked in the guise of responsibility and polite community ties. When I was 12 years old, my parents hired a local high school student named Nathan to watch over me and my 6-year-old sister for a weekend while they attended an out-of-state conference. Nathan was a referral from a public community board, a seemingly mild-mannered honors student who shared the same educational background as my father. That superficial connection was enough to bypass any meaningful background scrutiny. During the first afternoon, Nathan's behavior was flawlessly calibrated to lower our defenses. He did not act like an authoritative caretaker. He positioned himself as an older peer, volunteering to play my favorite video games for hours and ordering fast food with the emergency cash my parents had left. He was establishing a false sense of camaraderie, a fundamental grooming tactic designed to make a child hesitant to report inappropriate behavior out of a misplaced sense of loyalty. My perception of him shifted drastically during the first night. I had always been a light sleeper, highly sensitive to changes in my environment. I woke up several hours past midnight, not to a physical disturbance, but to a subtle, unnatural change in the room's illumination. The ambient darkness was being pierced by the faint, sterile glow of an LCD screen. As my eyes adjusted, I realized Nathan was standing directly beside my bed. He was not checking on my safety. He was holding a digital camera, aiming the lens downward, meticulously capturing photographs of me while I slept. When I shifted my weight and sat up, the glowing screen immediately went black. Rather than fleeing or showing panic, Nathan relied on plausible deniability. He calmly pocketed the device and offered a smooth, rehearsed explanation, claiming he was simply utilizing his device's backlight to navigate the dark house while checking the window locks. He then casually reminded me that I was supposed to be asleep, subtly shifting the burden of guilt onto me for being awake. The psychological manipulation was highly effective.
I lacked the adult vocabulary to articulate the sheer violation I had just experienced, leaving me deeply unsettled but paralyzed by self-doubt. The atmosphere in the house the following day was suffocating. The friendly, pier-like facade he had constructed the day before was entirely gone. He actively avoided making eye contact with me, restricting his interactions to preparing meals for my younger sister. He had realized that I was no longer a naive, compliant subject. I was a potential liability. Knowing my parents were unreachable until the following afternoon, I spent the entire day consumed by a quiet, protective dread. I knew I could not physically overpower a 16-year-old boy, but I resolved that he would not have access to my younger sister. When night fell, I took my pillows and a heavy blanket, quietly abandoned my own bedroom, and positioned myself on the floor directly inside my sister's room, firmly engaging the interior thumb turn lock. I remained awake, staring at the sliver of space beneath the door. Hours passed in absolute silence. Then, I observed the hallway shadows shift. Someone was standing silently on the other side of the wood. The doorknob slowly and deliberately rotated until the latch caught against the locked mechanism. Realizing the door was secured, the person on the other side did not knock. They did not announce themselves or ask if everything was all right. Instead, I observed the mechanical manipulation of a rigid wire being guided into the exterior emergency release hole of the doorknob. Nathan was systematically attempting to bypass the interior privacy lock. I immediately stood up, pressed my body weight against the door, and tightly gripped the interior lock to prevent it from turning, making my presence undeniably known. I firmly announced through the barrier that I was fully awake, positioned right next to the bedroom window, and entirely prepared to alert the neighboring houses if he did not step away from the frame. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. He did not attempt to offer another rehearsed excuse. The mask had completely slipped. He lingered in the hallway for several agonizing minutes before I finally saw the shadow recede from beneath the doorframe. I remained sitting against that door, my hand still gripping the lock, until the sun came up and my parents returned home. Nathan departed the property mere minutes after my parents walked through the front door, exchanging polite pleasantries and collecting his payment before swiftly driving away. When my parents inquired why I had slept on my sister's floor, a profound wave of childhood shame and confusion overwhelmed me. The grooming had worked perfectly. I felt a bizarre, irrational fear that I would be blamed for the tension, so I offered a meaningless excuse about a bad dream. I never disclosed the reality of that weekend to them. It is a decision that haunts my conscience as an adult. I now fully understand that Nathan was not a clumsy teenager making a mistake. He was a methodical digital predator, collecting illicit material, utilizing our home as a hunting ground. The most chilling realization is not what he attempted to do in our house, but the absolute certainty that, because of my silence, he undoubtedly moved on to another family who trusted his polite smile.